this week, our first topic is screen time and online safety. So Australia have proposed a social media ban for under 16s, and a growing number of parents are embracing screen-free parenting. So it seems like public concerns about children and screen time are on the rise. Andrew, do you think this is justified?
I can understand why a lot of parents are heading in that direction, but in reality, I'm concerned that potentially children are missing out on some of the positive aspects of access to the internet. And so one of the things I'm working on is there's a workshop coming up in October around sort of moderating access to age-inappropriate content. And we're looking at some developments to try and get parental controls to interwork. Because currently,
so what does that mean? Yeah, for the lay person.
Yeah, so I'll try and do it in the style of the
Children
playground.
friendly, yeah.
I think the challenge at the moment for parents is there are a lot of parental controls. So from Apple, from sort of Android, different platforms have them, and then all the different applications have them as well. But they're all sort of self-contained islands. So what we're putting forward is a proposal that they can communicate with each other, so that a parent doesn't have to learn the intricacies of potentially tens or even hundreds of different things. They can just sort of do the settings once
system.
and it can share with others, so that for things like screen time and so on, you can say, well, let's limit my child's access to, say, 3 hours a day. And not have to worry about what that means, because maybe they're using a PS5, they're using an Android smartphone, perhaps a Windows laptop, and trying to fragment
coordinate all of them
would be impossible. Whereas if they interwork, it doesn't
Mark,
matter.
You're a parent, and you've got quite young children. And how do you sort of see this screen time issue, and sort of what Andrew's talking about, of like having one central parental controls, I don't know, like control station, HQ?
I'm very excited about this, to be honest. I mean, I completely understand the problem. My household is, largely an Apple household when it comes to the sort of the parents and the older members of the family. But I'm very aware that Apple has historically been not so great at the parental controls. So I've been very reluctant to give my younger children Apple devices, whereas actually Amazon has it a lot more cracked and locked down. So they have Amazon devices. But of course, then you have the interoperability challenges that presents. And as you say, there's always access to other types of devices in the household, whether that be TVs and other things, where you're never quite sure you've always done the right thing. So a sense of centralised policy control for the household affecting devices is immensely exciting.
You're an engineer, so you have a lot more technical know-how than I would say the average parent. How do you find parental controls at the moment? Are they intuitive, easy to use?
Once again, it is very platform specific, and I would say that in the Amazon world, it's brilliant. It's very locked down. It's very obvious. My wife is semi-technical, but she has full confidence in controlling that system. I think for the Apple ecosystem, like I say, it's a little bit more tricky. There are good screen time support, so locking down the amount of time that your children spend on devices is very straightforward, and again, very layperson friendly. But the content filtering aspect is much more challenging in that environment.
I want to challenge both of you and kind of problematize this a bit more, because this week the BBC have published a featured article entitled "What Screen Time Does to Children's Brains is More Complicated Than It Seems," and it includes analysis of hundreds of studies and expert opinions from researchers, psychologists, and paediatricians. And one study looked at 11,000 brain scans of children and found that there is no real discernible signal that suggests that excessive screen time leads to the things that we worry about, like poor mental health, cognitive difficulties, or delays with language. So I'm very interested in this idea of sort of quantity versus quality. So, the time that children are actually spending on screens versus what they're looking at. So, Andrew, what are your thoughts on this issue and on the BBC study as well?
So if I approach it in sort of two different ways, whilst I completely take the point that there's no problem per se with using screens, I think we do need to reflect on, it does mean that there's a lack of physical activity potentially. So I still think there's validity in having an absolute limit on screen time so that your child can go off and do other stuff as well. But then to layer in if you like, I think the point that the BBC was probably driving at, which is it's what you're doing that is most important. And I think I've seen other studies which look at the behaviour of social media platforms and the way that the algorithms deliberately prompt greater usage. That you're monetising engagement. So therefore, they give you sort of positive feedback. So you seek more. So there's a sort of reward culture. And of course, in some of the darker recesses of the internet, there's positively harmful stuff as well. So if all you did was to say, I'm going to limit your screen time, that is interesting, but certainly insufficient. What you then need to get into is, okay, so do I want to block access to specific applications or specific categories of content? So it's a lot more nuanced than just, it's 3 hours a night and job done for a parent, sadly, which obviously puts a lot more burden on parents. Because a lot of the, going back to parental controls for a moment, the different platforms use different language to mean the same thing, or confusingly sometimes the same language to mean different things. So a parent needs to invest a lot of time to get on top of that.
And learn about all these different systems, different words, taxonomy. What do you feel, Mark, about sort of what Andrew is saying about screen time versus screen quality? What are your thoughts as a parent?
Yes, I think it's really interesting. I mean, it's been a problem for a long time. I mean, actually, when I grew up in the 80s, we were, there were comments like, "Oh, you'll get square eyes if you watch too much TV." That was so it's been a thing that's been around for a while. This concern about too much time in front of, devices. And I think, as a parent, you have to also look at the evidence and also look at your individual children, how they respond. So, for example, my daughter, who's now 7. In the morning, she'll have a bit of TV time while we're sort of getting up, and that's fine for breakfast. But it takes me a good 3 or 4 minutes to attract her attention away from the device, and to actually, and there's a sort of almost like a kind of, strong force of attraction with the device. That sort of means that they're sort of completely switched off at times from the whole what's going on around them, and it can be very frustrating as a parent to then try and pull them in. And I do see mood changes with my children. If they get up and they decide to do some creative play together, which does sometimes happen, or we go out, as Andrew mentioned, and go for a walk or go and play in the park for a bit, the mood is often different, shall we say, to if they're just sat in front of a TV and the word zombified might come into play here, and it can create physical and mood changes. I really feel,
as a former speech and language therapist, I feel for parents, and particularly parents of young children, because I feel like there's very, very strong messages that are quite conflicting. So, for example, the World Health Organization recommends that children under 5 have no more than 1 hour of sedentary screen time a day, and none at all for children under 2. But now we're getting experts kind of arguing a bit more that it's about what they're doing online. And, the NSPCC takes a bit more of a nuanced view. They have, lots of structured guidance for different ages. So they're like, under 2, you can do screen time, say, to FaceTime Granny, or, and this social screen time. So, Andrew, I want to think about, a child could use an iPad for 5 minutes and watch something really horrific that traumatizes them for life, or they could spend 4 hours, doing FaceTime, supervised with a parent, learning about stuff. What are your thoughts on this balance, this quality versus quantity?
As I said earlier, I do think there's value in having an absolute limit so that they do other stuff, and sort of touching on Mark's point, that so they're not entirely sedentary. Equally, absolutely. If they're doing things which are, say, educational, It's hard to argue against that. But so wear my Internet Watch Foundation hat for a moment. We do see significant problems where a child is happily, say, using a game, but then is contacted through the game by a predator, and then swiftly moved onto an encrypted messaging platform.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, there are statistics which show it can take literally less than a couple of minutes for a child to fall victim of sextortion. So
which can have really horrendous outcomes.
Which absolutely can, and so I mean, yes, you need to talk to your children about what they're doing and so on, but I think sometimes people that are against controls use that as the sort of the get out of jail card, if you like.
Yeah.
And I think you can't educate your children to protect them, against all of these harms. So going back to parental controls, that's where things like parental controls can absolutely help as a sort of safety net. So you can stop access to, for example, some of the encrypted messaging platforms to greatly reduce the risk of those problems. But as I say, I think I still believe that having an absolute limit on screen time is beneficial, and getting them moving, doing other things, is important.
Because that's a sort of, there's a physical health argument, there's a mental health argument, but there's also a sort of preparedness, and like you're saying, there's these malicious people out there. And Mark, I'm really interested because the other day you told me that your young children don't have access to the internet. And I'm really interested in sort of like, do you feel, is there a bit too much of a sort of like abstinence culture with screen time that then maybe we're not sort of thinking about online safety and the difference between an online device and an offline device for a child? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I think, to be clear, my children don't have direct access to Google search in that way, but they have access to curated content. And there's a difference there. So I mean, and
is
actually,
that like sort of YouTube for kids, or
and I think I back to the quality point. I'm really keen on the quality point, and I mean, I went through an exercise of completely shutting down a lot of even the YouTube kids content, because it was just very badly made, very poorly produced content, which was, had no educational value whatsoever and was absolute utter rubbish, being frank. And actually, but you're right, there's a lot of content that is curated, which is great. There's some really good material made by the BBC, which is, fun but educational. And I think there's, I'm all in favour of that. I mean, ironically, of course, whilst my children have direct access to the internet, my 8-year-old son is very curious. He'll say to me, "Oh, what about this, that, and the other?" And my first approach is always going to be, "Oh, let's look it up." So he will with me, because of course you want to sort of, let's watch a video on how cheetahs run. Let's actually.
And that's really, the NSPCC really advocate that supervised engagement
access,
where it's the parent and the child together.
So you're not sort of like, you're not sort of removing your children in a sort of slightly Amish sort of community thing and saying, actually, we're not going to do the internet. What we're saying is, actually, we're going to let you do things which we know, and actually the great thing is other platforms are doing for us now, that it's being curated for you, and you can be more sure about it. We're not going to give you unfettered access to Google search to find whatever you like and go to dodgy sites, etc. But actually, when you do want to find things, we will use Google. We will use ChatGPT to generate a quiz, for example. That's the best one at the moment. My kids love that. Yeah. Do me a quiz on some topic, and then it's brilliant for that. So it's using things appropriately, and also I think as Andrew said, thinking about quality and limiting the amount of time as well is really important.
So just as a last thing from both of you, like, if you could say in one word or maybe 2 words, what one thing should we all be doing to keep children safe online? Andrew?
Oh gosh, one. Well, I suppose as a minimum, talk to the children, because no matter how careful you are with your technical controls, children are clever. They're creative. They will sometimes accidentally, sometimes deliberately find ways to circumvent controls. So if you've not had those conversations, then they'll be horribly unprepared for what happens next.
And what about you, Mark?
Yeah, I would say that transparency of communication is as you know is really important. That's a primary one. But I think also I think engaging. I do think engaging with not sort of being passive, actually being active about the content your children are watching, and I mean, my elder daughter's actually behind the cameras today, working with us this morning. She will probably give you a sort of that I was fairly strict in terms of the access they had growing up, but I think actually being engaged with the problem and actually not just letting things just play out, I suppose.
Yeah, thank you both.